Okay, so I'm going to be talking about planning units, planning lessons, what goes into that, what teachers consider to go into that. I'm also going to be talking about a lesson that I recently observed. I'm going to talk about what was effective in that lesson, what strategies, what kind of assessments the teacher used, and how effective they were or weren't, those assessments. And then I'm going to finish by talking about my own experience planning units. And then I will probably never see you ever again. Just kidding. Okay, so I recently sat in on a fourth grade math lesson at the elementary school that I currently teach at in Seoul, Korea. The math lesson was about symmetry, symmetrical shapes, congruent shapes, and similar shapes. Math is really not my thing, so I was especially interested to see how this teacher could grab not only her students' attention and keep it, but also mine. But overall, it was definitely a very effective lesson. I think the teacher, she incorporated many different methods and strategies that fit many of the different learning preferences that were present in her class. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those first. She used the smartboard and smart docs primarily in her lesson, especially with her mini lesson, which I thought was really key because when you're explaining concepts concepts that are a little bit more abstract, like math and geometry, it definitely helps for some of the more visually oriented learners to be able to see the concepts on the board and to be able to see the objectives they're supposed to be reaching, as well as hearing them. So I thought the teacher did a good job of making sure that more than one type of learning preference was accommodated there. For instance, one of her smart docs was a picture of a butterfly, and the butterfly was cut in half. You only could see half of the butterfly and vertically, and then she had her students come up, and one of them would maybe draw the other half of the butterfly's head to make a symmetrical head, or the other half of the abdomen, or the wing, or the antenna, so on and so forth. So I thought that was a really good strategy for her because she could reach visual learners, or I'm sorry, not visual learners, but learners with visual preferences through that method or that strategy. She could also get to some of the students that learn more kinesthetically because they were able to move around, walk up to the board, grab the pen, drag it over the board, and then see the digital line created. And also for students who maybe prefer to learn more creatively, they possibly interpreted that exercise as doing art or drawing. So I thought she did a good job there. She also did some interactive flash games on the internet, which I thought was a really neat strategy because I don't generally associate math with games or having fun so much. So I thought that was a good approach. So what she did was she split her students up into teams by row. And then she had each row of students come up to the board, and then they would play the game. And so one of the games was at the bottom of the smart board. There was a pattern. It was a block of squares, and they were colored in such a way that the students had to find the matching, well, not matching, but the mirroring pattern. So if this block was here, they had to find the other one up on the board and bring it down, drag it down. But the students had to choose from maybe 10 different patterns on the board. So it was actually a little confusing for me even at first, but it was good to see the students working together and helping each other. So what they had to do was just kind of, solve as many patterns or make as many pairs, symmetrical pairs as they could within 1 minute. I liked this a lot, this strategy, because she was using basically gamification to teach this part of the lesson. I thought that was really, really smart on her part, because one, gamifying things or material makes causes more fun in the classroom, makes for more fun learning. And then not only are the students having fun and playing a game, but also there's a certain amount of formative assessment going on that the kids are most likely not even aware of. So it's a win-win for everyone. The teacher is able to assess the children's learning level, and then the students are allowed to have fun at the same time while learning, and then everyone goes home happy at the end of the day. So I'm definitely going to try and incorporate more games into my own lessons. Really like that. As far as other assessments, there was a lot of teacher prompted student participation. She would call on the students to, as I mentioned earlier, complete the other half of the head of the butterfly or the other half of the wing. Or she also had some shapes or objects on the board that were symmetrical, and then she would have a student come up to the board with the smart pen and draw a line down the center showing the symmetry within the shapes. So those were definitely two good assessments. She varied it. She had volunteers come up, or sometimes she just would call out on a kid or call out a student to come up to the board. So I thought that was a good, mixing it up rather than just picking the same kids or having the same volunteers every time. That was a good approach. She did another formative assessment that I thought had mixed results. Basically, before moving on from symmetrical shapes to congruent shapes, she kind of took a break and had a worksheet for the students to complete, which this worksheet kind of reminded me of like an exit card, but instead of having to demonstrate the knowledge they acquired in the day to leave the class or to go home, they had to complete this worksheet to move on from symmetrical shapes to congruent shapes. And that made a lot of sense to me, because if you don't know symmetry, then you're not going to know congruence. So what the students had to do was they each received a blank piece of graph paper, and then they had to either draw or shade in a symmetrical shape. And the teacher walked around and kind of observed how the students were doing. I like this. I like the artistic part of it, the creative part of this, allowing the kids to, draw. But I saw some kids kind of peeking over the shoulder at other students because they, maybe they didn't understand, or they just wanted to get through it, or they didn't want to do the work. Either way, I thought that allowed some students to kind of skate by. But I'm sure the teacher already knows which students are doing that, and I'm sure she was aware of that. But overall, I would say that it was definitely an effective lesson, and she made sure to accommodate the different learning preferences and learning profiles in her class, as well as using varied assessments, formative assessments throughout the class. So yeah, I definitely learned a lot from that lesson. So the unit I'm planning in this module is actually the first unit I've ever planned, and it seemed overwhelming at first, but I definitely quickly realized how important proper and thorough planning of units are for deep learning for students. I think the first things first, you got to start with your standard and then your objectives, and pretty much plan backwards from there. Then pick out your material, and then come up with your summative assessments. So this unit that I'm going to be doing is for first grade ELA in Hawaii, and it's using the Common Core standards. Here's one of the standards here. This is a live binder that I've organized my unit in. We have objectives here, some smart objectives that are here. I really like the live binder. It's a great organizational tool. You can make notes on your different types of assessments. You can take notes on the field. You can put a paragraph about the ethics of your classroom to remind yourself. You can also create a tab for cultural context, so you can research maybe ways to approach different cultures that you're not familiar with in your classroom as far as your students' cultures. And here we have the project-based learning tab. I think what I've learned from planning units or planning this unit is that project-based learning and student-centered learning are key to deep learning for students, because it's not just rote. They're not just memorizing facts and then taking a test. They're actually getting involved in the real world in some sort of capacity, and applying what they've learned in the classroom. So I think that's so important. With my my unit, basically the final project, the students are going to write poems, because all the standards in the unit are creative writing standards, essentially teaching them how to use figurative language, metaphor, and whatnot. And so they're going to write poems or short stories about the environment, and then they're going to help me in the future, once I get a job in Hawaii, to plan a reading, which will be live casted over the internet using this app, Periscope. And anyone can come and join the reading, and hopefully this will raise awareness about environmental issues, and it will teach the kids about responsibility by planning the reading, and will also show them that writing is something that can be used to affect change in the world. So starting off with just a small standard from the Common Core, you can turn it into something big like that. So it's really important to spend the time to plan your unit thoroughly.